Good evening. Thank you all for coming tonight, and we appreciate James Corey and Nick Strickland coming to take us on this walk down Main Street back 1940. I think for those of us that didn't live here during that time, we've heard stories, and so we just appreciate them coming and presenting this program to us. And so we want them to have as much time as possible. After the program, we'll have some announcements, but right now we're going to let them just go ahead and take over. So, James, I'm going to turn it over to you. And certainly James Corey does not need an introduction, and neither will Nick Strickland. So, thank you.
Well, some really make
Thank you, sir.
who they are. Can I talk about you?
I'm looking out in the audience and I see all these folks that taught me or raised me or whatever. But anyway, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I think this will be something you'll enjoy. Sirlene asked me to do this, I guess, based on some pictures I put out on the internet about a month or so ago. And it's sort of a hobby. I have a website and I like doing old pictures about Fort Valley and Peach County. And I stumbled across some pictures at the Thomas Public Library that I thought were really interesting. There were some pictures that Mr. Bennett Regan Sr. took. And it was just he took about 50 of them, but it was in a time frame of like September, October, November of 1946 and 47, I think it was 46. So it's like a time capsule of pictures, and it's interesting because it captured Fort Valley at that particular time. I have incorporated some other pictures with this presentation, so it won't be all of those, but it's going to be of the decade, and actually it's really going to have some pictures. They have one or two that's like 1939 and have one up to 53, so it's going to be in that time frame, but about 90% of them you'll find out will be in the 40s. And somebody has already raised the question, was I even around in the 40s? And yes, I was, because I was born in 1948. I just don't remember anything, but I do remember the pictures, and I remember some of these characters that you're about to see. So I guess that's enough intro. We'll go ahead and start this show, if you will. We'll get this live. And this is something that Nick and I are doing together, obviously because Nick's a little bit older than I am, and he's been around. He knows some of these characters better than I do. He's going to tell a lot of the stories. I want to thank Rich Bennett ahead of time for doing the presentation here. This first photo, I believe you gave me this one, I think, Nick, but this is just a general picture of Fort Valley back in 1947. And the reason we know it's 47, this picture right here, this car belonged to Wallace Hardeman. And this was his laundry there, the odorless cleaners. And it's interesting to some of the things that were around back then. You still see the triangle and the old holly tree and the size of it at that time. This was 64 Tire Company, is that right, Nick?
That's correct.
It was a garage, I guess. I don't remember it, but I've just heard of it. But people, I do know that people used to drive through there, which is interesting. It's also labeled Taylor's Drug Store, Worsing Drug Store. It was eventually Camelian, Maine at one time. Interesting also, just look at the trash cans. I thought those were interesting. And you can't see these real well, but there were some Coca-Cola signs interspersed all through here. Go ahead, this is just the intro into what we're about to see. And I believe this picture was taken at the same time from the opposite end of the street. You can see the Winona Hotel there, prominent at that time. This building, I believe at the time, was Mr. Halpern's building. I don't know if y'all remember Muriel Nathan. Well, this was her father's retail store. And Nick, you'll have to help me with some of these other ones at that particular time.
The next one down was the Leader Tribune. And just beyond the Leader Tribune, I believe, was what later became the fashion shop. James, I do not remember what was in there in this city.
And at some point in time, this was Carruthers Furniture. This was Corey's department store. I recognize the owner. It's hard to tell. That's Edwards. That's on down the street. This is way on down. This is like where Wilton Walton's place is right now. Go ahead. I'm going to start with the person I know best. This is my father. 1946. My daddy was 43 years old at the time. I was not born at this particular time. And these captions up here are the things that Mr. Bennett Rigdon wrote. For some reason, my daddy got tabbed big-time operator. He was a merchant, obviously had Corey's department store, it was called at that time. He was a part-time farmer. He liked to dabble in raising corn and watermelons. People may not remember that he had a sawmill out on 341, a small operation. He had a little bowling alley there next to Marshall Young's place that he owned for a while back then. And this was later on in the 60s or 50s, I guess. He was a city councilman. I just threw that in there. But that's my dad, and I'm proud of him. Go ahead. Go back up.
Yeah.
This is interesting. This picture correlates to that poster right there. This man right here is Ponto Gooden. He was a great friend of our family. And the reason you see all these people, because Ponto passed out hundreds of these things all over town. And people were lined up because if you look on here, somewhere it says a gift to the first 50 customers. So these people were lined up. But just some interesting things. Ladies' raincoats were $1.98. Men's shorts were 39 cents a pair. Men's dress shirts were $1.98. Boys' t-shirts were 3 for $1. Just to give you an idea of some of the prices back then.
Jay, is that Ponto, Dr. Vincent's Ponto too?
I think it was. That's right. This is Ernest Reed. I know him. He was probably about 10 years old. He was the same age as my brother. He was William's best friend at the time. His daddy was Mr. Ernest Reed. But we had not even finished putting the canopies up. I mean, they had already advertised, as you can see with this poster. It was Saturday, May 21st, 1949. I was actually about 6 months old at that time, or whatever. But anyway, Daddy would have had the grand opening. Interesting thing, if you look for detail, in the reflection of the window there is the Peach Theater. I don't know if y'all can see that or not, but it says that was the Peach Theater as it was back then. Go ahead. Chief Grady Cochran, to me, the best police chief we ever had.
Absolutely.
1935 to 1970, that's how long he served this community. What people may not realize is that he was actually an interim sheriff for about 3 weeks, and from May 15 to June 23rd in 1940. The previous sheriff died, and I guess he just got to be appointed over the sheriff's department because he was doing such a great job with the police. So we did have a consolidation way back then, Dad. But I got to tell a little story about Chief Cochran. His wife worked for us, and they used to come to our Christmas parties at our house. And of course, he was the police chief, you know, and I was a little guy at the time. But I remember him always bragging about the eggnog, and he said it's always better each year. And that's because Daddy he said, your Daddy put more 4 roses in it. That always tickled me. I fondly remember this gentleman. He was well respected throughout the state. Everybody remembered him. And they also said about him that he got more done with a basket of peaches than anybody else in the state of Georgia. He would go to the Capitol and get things done for Fort Valley and Peach County back then, and he'd be taking them peaches in the summertime.
James, didn't he start the School Boy Patrol too?
He did. He certainly did, Mr. Scott. In fact, a lot of folks remember, I know Jimmy Yancey and a lot of other folks will have fond memories of that School Patrol thing that he started. But another thing, this is one of the pictures, again, that Mr. Bennett took. And you'll notice most all of them are going to be in front of Edwards Clothing Store. You're going to see this throughout these. For some reason, that's just where most of them were taken.
Nice can.
Go ahead. Rich.
I'm working.
Nick, I'm going to let you talk about Mr. Lynn Chapman here.
Well, Lynn Chapman was, I guess, Grady Cochran's right-hand man, and really was a kind of a rough, tough person. But like Grady Cochran, he still would do whatever he could do to keep a boy out of trouble instead of just locking somebody up. But at that time, Mr. Cochran had Lynn Chapman and Bosley Barfield, and later to come behind those two was Mr. T. Bellflower. So we had 1, 2, and then at one time had 3. associate.
In the background here is Johnson's store. I remember that because it was like 2 stores down from our store. And it was a Jewish fellow that had that store at the time. But
It was.
yeah, he was. Of course he was. Yeah. But I just remember him because he was like our competitor, a friendly competitor at the time. Go ahead, Rich. Since we had some of the politicians and stuff of that era, this is Sheriff Beeland, Herbert Beeland. He was our sheriff of Peach County from 1943 to 65, and not sure exactly when this picture was, but this is Matt Mullis's granddaddy, by the way. His granddaddy was a sheriff, and of course his father, Reg Mullis, was also a sheriff. Go ahead, I'll change that. Mr. Bernard Young, again, the time frame, 1947, he was what we called, at that time, a Peach County ordinary. We would call him a sole commissioner today. And the one prior to him would be Mr. Mosley, Martin's granddaddy. But this is interesting. This is a picture in the courthouse, and in the background you can see the post office as it was back then. They call it the police station, I guess, now. But I call it the post office.
I think that rack of books is still there.
Probably. This hasn't changed much, that view from that window there. Go ahead, next picture. And I want to throw in the fire department. This was out of a book that the firemen had over the years. This building no longer exists. This building is behind, it's actually behind your old store, behind, what
It was on the
waterworks.
south side of the hotel, Winona Hotel,
But
Central Avenue.
I thought it was neat to have a nice fire station at the time. And some of the folks that were in there, Gus Wiggis, I know, you can't really tell that name, but Gus Wiggis was one of the owners of the Candy Kitchen. Mr. Eddie Hannon, Newton Jordan, he was on city council for like 38 years or something. He was a volunteer fireman. Mr. Tom Jones and Tom Anthorn. But just an interesting photo.
Yeah.
Next. Toon Mosley. This is one of the pictures again from Mr. Rigdon. They got him down here to capture the Byron Strong box, and he was a boxer, by the way, a boxer, a professional baseball player, and of course in the 60s he became a county commissioner. This is Martin Mosley's father. Very handsome man at that time.
Toon is remembered for his amateur baseball playing, and up at Byron they had a baseball field that was at the corner of 2 paved roads, and the schoolhouse was in the far distance. And Mosley enjoyed telling the story about how far he hit a baseball. And this is the first time I heard this as a boy. He said he hit it so far that it took 2 gallons of gas to go get it. That tells you a lot about Toon Mosley. The really nice thing about Toon Mosley, among many, is that his father was Judge Mosley and the first ordinary of this county. But he was a farmer and a gentleman if there ever been one.
One of my fond memories of Mr. Toon is he was a tennis player. Even in his 80s, he played tennis. And if you ever shook his hand, he had the biggest hand I've ever seen. But he was a great guy, and he loved to play tennis in his later years. Go ahead, Rich. Dr. Taylor, Malcolm Taylor. They got the pills rolling. He ran Taylor's drugstore, but I also found out that he used to work down at Anderson's, which is Avers.
Yeah.
And I did not know that until just recently, but
He worked at Avers for many years, really, and before he started his own drugstore. Now, Mr. Taylor had a very sad experience that I think is worth mentioning. He had one child, Keith, and she died as a young girl. I don't remember how old she was or what grade.
She was about 19, wasn't she a freshman in college? Yeah.
She was, well, But that was the first thing, I guess, that I remember of having that much effect on the whole city of Fort Valley. But everybody in this town grieved when that child died.
Go ahead, Rich. This is a picture of the store. And again, we showed this earlier when it was 64 Tire Company, and people used to drive through this building. But at some point in time, it became Taylor's. And based on these cars, this picture is probably 1953. It's probably not in the 40s, but I'm sure it looked like this in the 40s when Dr. Taylor owned it. But I remember because of the soda fountains. All the drugstores back then, Taylor's and Wheeler's and Aver's, they all had soda fountains back then. That's some of the fondest memories I have growing up here.
Now, something that's interesting to me is that the upstairs house Southern Belle.
Oh.
That's
Oh,
where
yeah, that's where the phone operators were.
Number please, I want 42. I mean, you know, that's just the way it was. But Bertha Bateman worked up there for years and years and years, and Inez Cigarette Wheeler worked up there too.
That's right.
So, and among others, there were others that worked up there. We had 3 or 4 women. that
Talking
were
about
there
the
for-
phone company, Nick, I remember when I was a young child, when I wanted to talk to my mother, all I did was pick up the phone and say, I want to speak to Mom, and they knew who she was. That's all I didn't have to have a number. Go ahead. Lawton Pearson, I'm gonna let you talk about him.
Well, Lawton was obviously a peach grower, son of John Pearson. Russ was his brother, and Tina was his sister, and it was even more that I don't recall right now. But the thing that I remember about Mr. Lawton was I never heard him raise his voice, ever. Now, I'm sure Al, and he's the father of Al Pearson, Al probably would not be in full agreement with that, but he was a real mainstay out at Pine Needles Golf Course. I remember the days that he would take his farm employees and take them out to the course and do whatever had to be done. You remember that, Dixon, I'm
I
sure.
played golf with him many times.
Yeah. Well, he was just what I said, a gentleman,
Yeah.
no question about that. And of course, Ann McGee is his daughter, and Peggy Gerald's old Imperial is his.
And Willard was his brother also.
Willard was.
Willard, yeah.
Willard was his
thank you,
brother also.
thank you. They called themselves they called their business the 4 Ps. And it was the 3 brothers and the father was what they had named their business after. But a great fellow, great citizen of Fort Valley.
I was hoping the Pearsons would be here because this is Mr. Sam McGee, and the reason I know him because he lived across the street from me. But he also worked at Fort Valley Oil Company, and unfortunately that was how this picture was when I got him at the library there. It was just, these things were actually pasted on cardboard. Somebody had pasted them all on cardboard, so I had to remove all that. He was already in that shape. But I finally remember him. He's the father of Sam and Bill McGee, and you know anything that you would like to add on?
Well, the thing that I remember about Mr. Sam, he was in our hardware store almost every day drinking a Coca-Cola at one time or another. A nickel Coca-Cola. And we were in the fishing tackle business a little bit, and I always tried to sell Mr. Sam something to fish with. And his favorite remark was, I fish in a river, I can't use this skeeter net stuff you sell. That was monofilament line. But he called it skeeter net fishing.
I remember they had a boat in their backyard. We had a big rain one time, and out there, it filled up. They went to paddle around in their backyard in that same river. Go ahead. Bill Carruthers and Herb Bartlett. I remember Mr. Bill because he had the store next door to ours. He had Carruthers Furniture. And right next to it, well, on the other side, I guess would be the fashion shop, and then was a grocery store called Farkas, and Mr. Hurd ran that. I remember Mr. Hurd because I don't remember the grocery store part, but I remember him when he worked at Pine Needles, and he was the chef or the cook out there. And that was the best place in town to eat. Everybody went there out on Sundays.
On
and there were
Sunday,
Tremendous lines out there, you know, waiting to get inside. And I found out from Mr. Wallace Hardeman this about Mr. Bill Carriza. He was a tall gentleman, as you can see, but I didn't know that. But he was a great basketball player. And I did not know that about him, but at some point in time, he went up north to Chicago or somewhere and was in a tournament representing Fort Valley, Beach County. That's how good he was. So, I never would have known that about him, but he was a fine man as well. He later worked for us just a short time after my father bought his store, and we expanded. And then later on, he opened up a little sandwich shop down the street. I remember that over there near the Parsan building there. And actually, the Parsan incorporated it. Go ahead, unless you want to add something.
I certainly would like to add the fact that he had a very industrious, wonderful wife in Sue that worked side by side in his furniture store and even in the restaurant that they later opened up. But she was a fine lady. This is Paul Friedman, and Mr. Friedman was a merchant. His store was adjacent to Young Superfood, as we know today, or did until January the 1st. But he it was a mercantile business, very similar to Corey's and his father's operation. He was not a man of much outgoingness, but he was frugal and he was a hard-working man, and he's the only man that I know that ever built a house between the one directly across from us tonight and the Evans house. He lived between Bud Evans and the Marshalls. So and he's lived there for a long time. In fact, I don't know why I guess Chop Evans finally just bought his house and removed it.
But didn't
Don't
they
you know
live-
That was right next door to you, sir.
It was, and I understand that when the tornado came through, it took it.
Did,
And George Culpepper told me that, he said, no one ever, once Bud Evans owned property, no one else got it. And said they could never understand that situation with that house that he let him build.
Yeah.
But said then whenever the tornado took it, that the property went right back to Mr. Evans.
Well, he was a real supporter of the public schools back in those days, and we had an excellent basketball team in '46, and we had a new coach to come in then, and Mr. Freeman had a brother that was a state level official, and he got his brother to come down and to referee a practice game for the Green Wave at that time.
I want to point out a couple of little details in this picture thing that I noticed. Right here is a sign that says reserved for doctors, and you'll see this in some other pictures. And the reason for that is because upstairs over Avers was some doctors' offices. So this is before we had a hospital, obviously, in 1947. They built the hospital on 50 floors. But anyway, I thought that was neat. They had a sign at that time. And the street lights. That's not a very good picture, but just take note of some of the little details of the times back then. Mr. Otis O'Neill, he was a county extension agent at the time and the founder of the Ham and Egg Show, which is still going on today.
Mr. O'Neill worked at Fort Valley State College for many, many years, and if you've ever been out to Fort Valley State and been in that original auditorium, he motivated the black farmers in this area to process their pork, meaning hams and shoulders and eggs and so forth. He got so big that the college was putting 4x8 sheets of plywood over the seats in the auditorium just to display the hams. I've got different pictures of that, and you just wouldn't believe how many hams and shoulders would be in an auditorium. He attracted an awful lot of support from the C&S Bank in Macon and other banks up there. They would come down to the ham and egg show, and the banks would pay $10, $15 a dozen for the #1 egg, $20 a pound for the hams and shoulders. It was a huge success, and as James previously stated, we're still having a ham and egg show now. It's cut way back from that situation. You don't have the display of meat like you want to. Did you?
Didn't that become something that everybody in the state of Georgia knew about, and so many?
Oh yeah, it was. Oh, it was known all over the country. Yeah, yeah. But he's one of the most successful men that we had to live here. Otis O'Neill. I don't know what to say here. This was called the hole in the wall. Now, a lot of Dexter and a few other people would remember that. When this picture was taken, Mr. Roberts actually was running a watch repair shop there. Dad had leased a building next to us here on the south side, and put in a grocery store. This store was about 4 feet wide and about 8 or 10 feet deep. Somebody put a front door and a roof between two buildings. Daddy rented that under those circumstances for 50 cents a week. That was his rent, 50 cents a week. Now, like James and all of you, I'm as proud of my dad as I could be. Dad was a 1930s entrepreneur. He never entrepreneured anything that sold for more than a nickel, I don't think. You see these cases of Coca-Cola, the first invoice that Dad ever had was for 3 cases of Coca-Cola. They cost 60 cents for the case. He ran a taxi cab, and to go from downtown Fort Valley to Hollins Court cost a dime, so he did get above the nickel. He was an agent for the Macon Evening News and the Macon Telegraph, the Atlanta Journal, and the Atlanta Constitution for 16 years. They all sold for a nickel. We've got another picture that you're going to see later, and I'll call your attention to it now. It's the inside of a store, and there was a kid there with a newspaper bag. That's a Macon Telegraph sack that we put papers in and rode our bicycles and pitched them out. Dexter, I expect you.
Yeah, he had several young children.
Oh yeah, David Simmons.
Working there, delivering papers.
I know we don't have much, and I don't want to take up too much time about my dad, but David Salmons, most of you know him, he later became the mayor here, very successful, great, wonderful person. He wanted to deliver newspapers for Mr. Nick. And so Daddy told him, well, I'll put you to work. And I pay you 50 cents a week to deliver these newspapers. 7 days now, 50 cents a week. And David says, well, I had